So today, the Speed Duel deck we'll be looking at today is Gravekeepers. It was one of the standout decks in the early meta and still is playable today with the release of the new sets, Cards of Battle. So starting off, we're going to look at the skill card. This is Tomb of the Pharaoh. It's from the Arena of Lost Souls booster, and it really doesn't do too much on its own. It's treated as Necro Valley, which becomes important later. But the main thing that it actually does is that it gets you 200 attack and defense on all your Gravekeepers monsters. And we only play Gravekeepers monsters in this deck, so it actually turns out pretty well. I mean, that helps a good bit to get over some of the other monsters, the 200, but you'll see why this becomes important a little later on. So to start off with, the boss monster is the Gravekeeper's Oracle, and this is definitely something you want to get out on the field as soon as possible. It's a really good monster with a lot of effects. And so just taking a look at the effects, the main thing you want to remember is that depending on how many monsters that you tribute for this guy, you get a different number of effects. So it's actually a 10-star monster, but you can tribute only one monster for it, but you only get the first effect. So actually, it's any effect, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so you get to choose one of the effects. Up to 3 effects, depending if you happen to tribute all 3 monsters for its summon. So the first effect is that it gains attack equal to the combined levels of all the monsters tributed, which is times 100, which is pretty good. That usually results in anywhere from maybe 400 to like 800 boost, depending on how many monsters you end up tributing. But the second effect is really good. Destroy all set monsters your opponent controls. It's really good if they happen to have a lot of set monsters. They play a lot of set monsters like monsters with flip effects or like Man-Eater Bug or maybe like a Yomi ship. I mean, that really will take care of those pretty quickly. So that's always good to have. And then the last effect is all monsters your opponent controls currently lose 2,000 attack and defense, which is a pretty ridiculous effect. Basically getting this guy out, I mean, you can take out any monster because he himself has 2,000 attack plus the boost from Tomb of the Pharaoh. So it's definitely a good boss monster to have on your side of the field. The next monster we'll look at is pretty standard for this deck. It's Gravekeeper's Recruiter. So we'll be playing 3 of him, and he's the 3-star monster with 1,200 attack, which is respectable for what the deck is. But his effect is very powerful. Basically, he's just a searcher for the deck. If he's sent to the graveyard, you can add a Gravekeeper's monster with 1,500 or less defense from your deck to your hand, which is actually any monster, including Oracle, with, I think, exactly 1,500, defense. So basically, it lets you search and add any monster from your deck to your hand, which is pretty huge. Definitely can come in handy in most situations where you're just trying to get out a certain monster to take care of a certain situation, because there's so many different Gravekeepers monsters in this deck with all the different effects. So speaking of that, here's the 3rd monster, Gravekeeper's Spear Soldier, and we'll be playing also 3 of him, and his effect is surprisingly good for this format. He basically just does piercing damage, and being 1,500, getting a boost from Tomb of the Pharaoh at like 17, he's really powerful and able to actually make a dent with this piercing damage, especially when it comes to the trap cards we play. It actually works pretty well, kind of synergizes well with Spear Soldier. So I think he's a really strong Gravekeeper's monster that pretty much everyone plays, I would say. They might play only 2 of him, but I think 3 is really good, especially with our trap lineup. So another monster is Gravekeeper's Priestess, and we'll be playing just 2 of her. Her effect is that if there's no field spell, basically you treat this monster as Necro Valley, and all Gravekeeper's monsters gain 200. So it's pretty much a copy of Tomb of the Pharaoh on a monster, and that's really good because more and more the meta with the new sets, they're just finding ways to pop spells or traps, and it's really easy to lose like a field card like Tomb of the Pharaoh. So it's good to have a backup one, especially when we get later on into some of the spell cards that we have. It really synergizes well with with that. So this is definitely a card you want to have, and I wouldn't play more than 2 just because it's a little weaker at only 1,000 attack, and 1,500 defense is respectable, but I mean it's really not going to get you too far in that regard. But the last monster that is actually pretty crucial, it's the Gravekeeper's Chief. So it's a 5-star, so this will take 1 tribute. But if you you can only control 1 Gravekeeper's Chief, but if you tribute this card, you can target 1 Gravekeeper's monster in your graveyard and special summon it. So it basically turns out to not really have a tribute cost in a way. So if you had any monster on the field, say like Oracle or something like that, like a pretty big boss monster, you can just tribute it away and then immediately get it back. So it actually is a very, very important card to have. You only want to run 1 because you can only have 1 face up. So it's a little bit tricky to... you don't want to be put in a situation where you have 2 of these in your hand, because then you really can't do much if those are the only 2 monsters you have. But it's really a really powerful card. I mean, with 1900 attack, again, getting boosted by Tomb of the Pharaoh, or even if you happen to have Priestess on the field too. I mean, that really, these monsters start to creep up into pretty high attack overall. There's not many things that right out of the gate can get over a lot of them, especially with some of their boosts. So yeah, so we're playing 11 monsters, which is actually quite a bit, but that's because we're not playing really too many spell or trap cards. Just we're gonna see we have Necro Valley, Hidden Temples of the Necro Valley right here. So if you must have a Gravekeeper's monster and a Necro Valley on the field to actually play this card. So how that works really well, it synergizes well with obviously the skill card, but then having Priestess on the field, because you basically can just put this down on the field and then immediately play this. And so actually getting into the effect of what it does is if you meet those requirements, you can play this, and then neither player can special summon any monsters except Gravekeeper's monsters. And that's actually pretty huge, as more and more decks just naturally turn to special summoning and like any sort of like fusion or any sort of like Monster Reborn-esque moves like that. I mean, you're definitely gonna be kind of blocking out a lot of people. Special summoning is gonna become just bigger and bigger in speed duels. I mean, just as the same thing that happened just with the normal Yu-Gi-Oh. So it's definitely good to have. So just running 2 of those is just nice, especially since you have Tomb of the Pharaoh plus the Priestess to pretty much guarantee you're gonna have those requirements met all the time. And so Wonder Wand is another really good one. Normally it's used with more like spellcaster decks, but actually all of these Gravekeeper's monsters are spellcasters. So it's, this isn't like a Dark Magician deck, but it actually works really well because basically you can equip this to any monster and it gains 500 attack, any spellcaster, but all of these are. So if you just have that, I mean, you're really good to go in terms of attack, but the benefit of the second part is that you can actually send both to the graveyard and draw 2 cards. So, I mean, you're able to do a lot of things with this Wonder Wand, which makes it a really powerful spell card to have. But I think that it's not really worth playing more than 2 because you don't want to draw into too many, or else, you're not really going to have the monsters to play, and that's really what this deck focuses on. That's why we play 11 monsters. It's a pretty monster-heavy deck. So now looking at the trap cards, the Rite of the Spirit is a pretty important one. It's basically a Monster Reborn for a Gravekeeper's monster. So this is really strong because if you have Hidden Temples of the Necro Valley, you can still use this because you're special summoning a Gravekeeper's monster, so that definitely completely works with that. So there's really nothing to ever stop you from doing this, at least what you're playing. So it's a really good card to have. You can drop, Oracle back on the field or really anything and just kind of, be able to just take the game back over if you're in a pinch. And now these last 2 traps. The first one is Windstorm of Etaqua, another staple, pretty much being able to just, stop an entire battle phase by switching all of the monsters into defense mode. So that's pretty huge. Playing 2 of those, it's a pretty standard play. It works really well with Spear Soldier because if you are able to get all the monsters in defense mode and your Spear Soldier can just attack right over them and deal piercing damage, it really synergizes well, and that kind of works really well into the next drop card, another staple, Kunai with Chain. We're playing 2 of these to round off the 20 cards, and it works again really well with Spear Soldier, where if you had a Spear Soldier on the field, you flip this, monster's in defense mode, and then you get a boost of 500 attack, and then you're able to just attack over that for piercing damage. So that's a really overall really good recap of the deck. It's nothing too focused on one boss monster. I mean, aside from Oracle, it actually does a really good job of kind of spreading out and having a lot of different effects for a lot of different monsters that kind of keeps the opponent on their toes. I mean, in terms of the Blue Eye strategy, you basically have, Tyrant, Red Eyes, or Blue Eyes to deal with, and probably a Lord of D to kind of add just some more protection on those monsters. So you kind of see where it's going every time, but with this, you don't really know what's coming since there's such a variety. So I think that kind of adds to it, and then you can definitely mess around with all of these spell and trap cards. I would say I think you probably want to keep Rite of Spirit in there, and you probably want to have something like a Windstorm or a Kunai with Chain. But if you want to switch out the other one, you could do that. If you, for some reason, really wanted to switch out Hidden Temples of the Necro Valley for something else, if you really don't feel like that's very effective, you can always do that. And side decking cards, I mean, I would pretty much side deck a lot of the standard cards. So this deck definitely gets hit by Ready for Intercepting, since they're all spellcasters. So that's one thing to watch out for. But if you want to side deck like a Mishazure or a Night Beam, that's always another good staple just to have. I think at this point, there isn't really a clear meta in terms of how many decks there are. I think there's like a pretty wide variety, so it's hard to really prepare. But I think this deck could creep up there. I'm not sure if we'd call it a top tier deck, but it's really a lot to deal with at times, and I think it's definitely has a lot of potential, especially if they release new sets that add any support for it. So yeah, feel free to leave your comments down below, letting me know if you what you think of the deck, if you have any if you played it, or if you have any corrections or any things that you would put in there, swap out. I basically, to what I can tell, this works pretty well. It's a pretty good balance, but just in my experience, just at my locals. So let me know what you guys think, and then yeah, thanks for tuning in. Until next time.